Hi, we read in this week's Parsha how the sons of Gad and Reuven asked to stay on the east bank of the Jordan River. Moshe at first was upset, but eventually agreed if they would fight in front of the Jewish people to conquer the land of Canaan. In the book of Yehoshua, we read how they kept their promise, and after the 7 years of conquering and 7 years of dividing the land, Yehoshua escorted them back to the east bank of the river to take their inheritance. The verse there says that when they reached their destination, they built an altar that resembled the altar that the Jewish people had built in Shiloh. When the Jewish people heard about this, they were so upset that they got ready to have a war. In those days, it was not simple. If a person would sin, everybody took it very seriously because it was known that the sins of the individual could affect the entire community. And at that time, it was forbidden to make an altar anywhere outside Mishkan Shiloh. So they sent Pinchas, the son of the high priest, together with the heads of the 10 tribes who lived on the west bank of the Jordan, and said, "What are you doing? How can you do this? It's forbidden. Your sin is going to be punished on all of us as the sin of Achan, who took from the forbidden city of Yericho." So those tribes explained that they did not intend to sacrifice on that altar. On the contrary, they had not even built any ramp or steps to that altar. It was just a monument. They built a monument so when their children would grow older and say, "We're not part of the Jewish people. Look, there's the Jordan River between us." So their parents and grandparents would point to that altar and say, "No, that altar, that's exactly the same as the altar in Shiloh. We're one nation, and this is a reminder of our unity." So the tribal leaders and Pinchas were satisfied with that answer. They told the Jewish people the war was averted, and that's that. Now we see from here the importance of keeping the Mizbeach and the Beis HaMikdash forefront in our mind. Here, talking to you from the old city of Jerusalem, we are not separated by any rivers from the site of the Beis HaMikdash, but we are separated by many centuries of time. And certainly we have to put an effort into continuing the memory and keeping it alive in our hearts and minds, which is why it's so important, especially during the 3 weeks and the 9 days, to learn about the Beis HaMikdash and its measurements and its spiritual components, as the Lubavitcher Rebbe encouraged. So a little bit more about the Mizbeach. The Mizbeach is called Ariel, Lion of God, in Yecheskel and in Yeshaya, by those two prophets. And there's different explanations for it. Some say it's because Aryeh, a lion, represents the Shechina, as it says, Aryeh Shoag Milo Yira, Hashem Elokim Diber. So the lion represents the Shechina, and the Mizbeach was where the Shechina would rest. In fact, it says in the Gemara that a fire came down from heaven in the shape of a lion and remained on that Mizbeach in the first Beis HaMikdash throughout the time there. It was a miraculous fire. It also has to do with the fact that the Beis HaMikdash was built by King Solomon, who comes from the tribe of Yehuda, who is compared to a lion. It is different than the second Beis HaMikdash when the fire looked like a dog. And I saw an interesting commentary who explained that the lion keeps quiet, doesn't bother anybody, but when he attacks, and he doesn't differentiate between the wealthy and the poor. He just kills whoever he or she chooses. Whereas a dog makes a lot of noise, but as soon as the owner winks at it and tells it to be quiet, it's quiet. So at the time of the first Beis HaMikdash, the holy people were like a lion. They weren't so obvious. They kept to themselves, but when it was time to speak out, they roared and they shouted and they prophesied and they put down even the most important wealthy people or kings or whatever it was. At the time of the Second Temple, unfortunately, the level went down. And although people would scream and shout if there was evil going on, but they would only do it towards people who were not their owners, so to speak. The wealthy people who would, so to speak, own the rabbis, If they winked and said, let's keep quiet about this particular transgression, they would keep quiet. So that's why it's compared to a dog. In any case, the Gemara in Ksubas says that the mem of Mizbeach stands for Meziach, it removes bad decrees. Mezin, it brings sustenance to the world. And Mechabev, it brings love between Hashem and the Jewish people. And Mechaber, it atones for the Jewish people's sins. So it's interesting that the order seems not so logical. You would think first Hashem would atone, and then he would remove decrees, and then he would sustain, and then he would show his love. But in fact, the atonement comes at the end. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe explains that the lesson is the Mizbeach represents such a deep love between Hashem and the Jewish people. Even if the sins are not atoned for yet, even if we still have those sins, Hashem still averts the decree, because deep down he loves us. He still sustains us even while we have those sins. And he still showers us with his spiritual love and revelation, even while we have the sins. And ultimately, he helps us get out of those sins and atones for them as well. And this explains the Gemara in Gittin. The Gemara at the end of Tractate Gittin says that if a person divorces his first wife, the Mizbeach cries for him or for them. So what does it mean the Mizbeach cries? Why is it so emotional? There's different commentaries. Some say the Mizbeach is upset because it used to get sacrifices when the couple would have a baby. And now it's not going to get those sacrifices. But it's difficult to understand. Why is that so emotional? One more sacrifice, one less sacrifice. Anyway, whenever the altar was empty, they had spare sacrifices just to bring at any time. So it was never really missing anything. Some say it has to do with the Shechina. The man and the woman represent the Zah and Malchus, different spiritual aspects of the divine attributes. And when there's a separation between them, the Mizbeach, which represents the Shechina, that is the level of Malchus that the woman represents, is upset about that breakup because that is what the very level that the Mizbeach represents. But according to the explanation of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, it is clear. The whole premise of the Mizbeach is that the love overcomes deficiencies. Hashem's love for the Jewish people overcomes his awareness of our deficiencies. Even if he sees them and is aware of them, he still removes the decrees, still satisfies us, sustains us, and still loves us. And eventually, we work it out and he atones for us also. So a couple that sees deficiencies in each other, that's normal. But their love should be so deep that they should manage to not have bad decrees, not have big fights. They should manage to sustain each other, show their love for each other, even while they are aware of those deficiencies, and eventually they can come to a place where they don't even see those deficiencies at all. If a couple cannot do this, then they're missing the whole lesson of the Mizbeach, which is why the Mizbeach is upset about that. I wish that you should all have a good Shabbos and a good month. May this month be transformed to a month of mercy. Mashiach should come. We should rebuild the third Beis HaMikdash and the Mizbeach. The fire should descend from heaven and once again show us Hashem's great love for us wherever we may be. Mashiach Tzidkeinu b'mheir v'yameinu.